The cobblestone streets of the small countryside town were alive with whispers of speculation. A mysterious visitor had arrived, sparking curiosity among the residents. Some claimed he was a wealthy landowner seeking new investments, while others insisted he was a nobleman from a distant land. Yet the truth was far more intriguing than anyone could imagine. The visitor was Ethan Carter, a successful 32-year-old entrepreneur whose charm and sophistication were evident in every step he took. He exuded confidence, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, but behind his polished demeanor lay a man carrying the weight of a tragic past. Ethan had once called this very town home, though his memories of it were anything but fond. 25 years earlier, he had fled the town as a frightened and heartbroken child, leaving behind the pain of a devastating loss. The years had transformed him into a man of influence and wealth, but the wounds of his past had never fully healed. Now, Ethan had returned to the place that had once brought him so much suffering. He wasn't here to reconcile or relive old memories. He had come with a purpose. The name Carter might have been forgotten by most in the town, but for Ethan, it represented the unresolved injustice that had haunted him for decades. He was here to settle the score. 25 years ago, Ethan was just a 7-year-old boy living with his mother, Margaret, in the workers' quarters of Carter's farm. It was a sprawling and prosperous farm, but under Mr. Carter's harsh management, life for the workers was grueling and oppressive. Margaret worked as a cook in the grand house where the Carter family lived. Every morning, she rose early to prepare meals for the family and staff. Despite the hardships, Margaret always carried a warm smile to reassure Ethan. Ethan would often sneak into the kitchen to see his mother after school. "Ethan, you can't let Mr. Carter see you here," she'd warn, but she'd still slip him a cookie or a piece of fruit. Through those small gestures, Ethan felt her love and care. Life on the farm continued uneventfully until a mysterious illness swept through the region, changing everything. The disease spread quickly, and no one knew how to stop it. When the first workers fell ill, Mr. Carter immediately ordered them to be quarantined in the old horse stables. "Mom, why don't they stay in the guest house?" Ethan asked one day. Margaret hesitated before answering, "Because the master doesn't want to take risks. To him, we're replaceable." As time passed, the illness worsened, and Margaret herself began to show symptoms. Ethan watched helplessly as she grew weaker, yet she continued to work until she could no longer stand. When her condition deteriorated further, she was sent to the stables. "Ethan, you mustn't come here," she told him firmly, her voice frail. "I don't want you to get sick." Ethan refused to listen. Risking everything, he brought her water, fruit, and small bowls of soup. He did all he could, but it wasn't enough. Margaret's condition grew worse with each passing day. Then came the fateful night. Torrential rain poured down as Ethan heard his mother's faint voice calling for him. He ran to the stables and found her lying there, exhausted but still trying to smile. "Ethan," she whispered, "I don't have much time. Promise me you'll study hard, become an honorable man, and live a good life. I love you." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "No, Mom, you'll get better," he cried. But those were the last words she ever spoke to him. Desperate and heartbroken, Ethan ran to the grand house, banging on the door and begging Mr. Carter for help. "Please, call a doctor. My mom and the workers are dying." Carter looked at the drenched boy with disdain. "I'm not spending money on replaceable people like your mother. Now get out before you stain my floors." The next morning, under a light drizzle, Margaret was buried. Grace, Mr. Carter's wife, approached the grieving boy and held him close. "You can't stay here, Ethan," she whispered. "This is no place for you." She handed him an envelope with some money and an address in the city where she said a relative would take him in. The following morning, Ethan left the farm with a broken heart and a vow. One day he would return, not as the helpless boy he was, but as someone strong enough to confront the past. 25 years later, Ethan Carter returned to the small town where he had grown up, but this time he was no longer the frail, frightened boy of his past. Standing tall, exuding confidence with every step, and dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, Ethan quickly became the talk of the town. Rumors of his arrival spread rapidly, and it wasn't long before they reached Mr. Carter's ears. The once powerful landowner was now a shadow of his former self, Age and poor financial decisions had left the farm struggling to stay afloat. Hearing that Ethan was a wealthy businessman, Carter didn't recognize the boy he had once dismissed. Instead, he saw Ethan as a potential lifeline for his failing estate. Carter wasted no time in extending an invitation to Ethan for dinner at the farm. Standing before the grand doors of the house he once feared, Ethan took a deep breath before stepping inside. Carter greeted Ethan with a fake smile, playing the role of a gracious host. Throughout the meal, he spoke endlessly about the potential of the farm and the lucrative opportunities it could offer. Ethan listened carefully, his expression unreadable. Sensing hesitation, Carter made a bold proposal. "Ethan, I know you may still be considering your options. To show my goodwill, I'd like to offer my daughter Clara in marriage. A union between us would guarantee a strong and trustworthy partnership." Ethan calmly met Carter's gaze, keeping any hint of surprise from his face. He knew this was an opportunity to get closer to his ultimate goal. "I'll think about it," he replied, his voice steady though his mind raced with possibilities. That night, back at his inn, Ethan mulled over Carter's unusual offer. Though marrying Clara wasn't part of his original plan, he realized it could be the perfect way to achieve his objective. Ethan hadn't just returned to confront his past. He had found a new path to reshape the future for both himself and Mr. Carter. A few days later, Ethan agreed to visit the farm to meet Clara. Mr. Carter led him through the busy work areas where laborers tended to crops and horses. As they approached the stables, Carter stopped and called out loudly, "Clara, come here. I want to introduce you to Ethan." From a hidden corner, a young woman emerged. She wore worn-out clothes, her hands and arms covered in dirt, and her posture was weary yet reserved. Clara walked toward them, keeping her gaze fixed on the ground to avoid meeting Ethan's eyes. "This is Clara, my daughter," Carter announced with pride, as though presenting a prized possession. Ethan studied Clara, noticing her shyness and unremarkable appearance. Yet, something about her piqued his curiosity. Sensing hesitation in Ethan's expression, Carter quickly added, "She's not like the glamorous women you might be used to at grand parties, but I assure you she'll make a fine, capable wife." Ethan gave a subtle nod and replied simply, "I agree." A few days later, a small wedding was held at the farm. The ceremony was so modest it felt almost insignificant. Only a few of Carter's business associates and the local pastor were in attendance. Clara wore a plain white dress with her hair loosely tied back, her face calm and expressionless. Ethan stood by her side, quietly observing every detail of the event. When the ceremony concluded, Carter smiled with satisfaction, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. "Now we're family. I look forward to a long and fruitful partnership with you," Carter declared. Ethan offered a polite smile, but his mind remained fixed on his ultimate plan for revenge. On their first night together, Clara sat silently in a corner of the small house Carter had arranged for them. Ethan stood near the window, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon outside. The air between them was heavy, but not hostile. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but gentle, "I know this marriage isn't what you wanted. I have no intention of forcing anything." He turned to face her, his expression sincere. "I'll sleep in the next room. Let's keep things simple." Clara looked up at him, her eyes briefly showing a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Ethan left the room, leaving Clara alone. As he closed the door behind him, a strange feeling stirred within him. Clara had been nothing more than a tool in his plan for revenge, yet now he couldn't shake his curiosity about her. A quiet woman who seemed to carry a deep story beneath her reserved exterior. In the days following their wedding, Ethan and Clara began to adjust to life together. Though their relationship started distant and awkward, time gradually drew them closer. Each morning, they sat on the porch, sipping hot coffee while gazing at the endless fields stretching before them. Clara, deeply familiar with the workings of the farm, often shared details about its daily operations. From tending to the horses to harvesting crops, she spoke with a dedication that surprised Ethan. In the afternoons, they walked along winding dirt paths around the property. During these walks, Clara began to open up. "My mother died giving birth to me," she said one day, her voice heavy with emotion. My father has never forgiven me for it. He's always seen me as a burden." Ethan was silent, listening as Clara shared the pain of her childhood. Blamed for her mother's death, she had grown up in the shadow of her father's cold indifference. "He's tried to force me into marriages I didn't want," Clara continued. "But I found ways to stop him. I dressed like a worker, kept myself plain, and stayed away from him as much as I could." Ethan felt a wave of empathy as he understood the depth of Clara's struggles. She wasn't just surviving, she was protecting herself in the only way she knew how. Over time, Ethan began to see that Clara was nothing like her father. She was different, with a kind heart and an unyielding spirit. Their conversations grew deeper, and occasionally their shared laughter lightened the once heavy air between them. One evening, under the starry sky on the porch, Clara hesitated before asking, "Ethan, why did you agree to marry me? You didn't know anything about me back then." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes steady. Instead of answering directly, he said, "I have my reasons, but it's not time for you to know yet. One day I'll tell you." Clara didn't press further, but her expression softened. Ethan realized that through Clara, he was beginning to rediscover something he hadn't felt in years. Not just a connection, but a sense of peace he thought he had lost forever. As time went on, Ethan and Clara's bond grew stronger. Clara's presence didn't just ease the painful memories Ethan carried, it also brought him something he hadn't expected: peace. One afternoon, as they strolled through a field of vibrant sunflowers, Ethan suddenly stopped. He looked at Clara, his eyes filled with inner conflict. "Clara," he began, his voice slow but serious, "there's something I need to tell you." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression curious but calm. "I'm not just a businessman who came here to work with your father," Ethan said, meeting her gaze. He took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm the boy who once lived in the workers' quarters of this farm. I watched my mother die in despair, and your father, he refused to help her, even when I begged him to call a doctor." Clara stood still, her breath catching. Ethan went on to recount everything, from the way Carter had treated his mother to how Grace had saved him and helped him escape. He confessed that he had returned with the sole purpose of seeking revenge. "Marrying you was originally just part of that plan," he admitted. Clara listened silently, tears brimming in her eyes. Ethan's tone softened as he continued. "But everything has changed. That plan doesn't matter anymore. Since meeting you, I've realized that hatred only hurts me. You've shown me that there are more important things: love, forgiveness, and a chance at a new life." Clara turned away briefly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know how to take away your pain, but I do know I want to be by your side." Ethan gently took her hands in his gaze steady and sincere. "We can do that together. Let's leave this place. Let's build a new life, one without hatred or the shadows of the past." Clara looked at him for a long moment, then smiled softly through her tears. "With you, I'll go anywhere." The next morning, just before the sun rose over the fields, Ethan and Clara quietly left the farm. They carried little with them, just a few bags and a future filled with hope. Before leaving, Ethan left a letter on the table in the grand house where Mr. Carter often sat. In the letter he wrote, "Mr. Carter, I think it's time you knew the truth. I am not just a stranger who came here seeking a business partnership. I am Ethan, the boy who once lived in the workers' quarters, the boy who begged you to save his mother on the night she died, but you refused. Those memories haunted me for 25 years, driving me back here with one purpose: revenge. But things have changed. In this time, I found something I never expected: love and peace. Your daughter, Clara, showed me that holding on to hatred only hurts me more. She is nothing like you. She is strong, compassionate, and has transformed my life. I also cannot forget Grace, your late wife. She was the one who saved me, who gave me the chance to start over. I cannot hold on to my hatred for you when I owe her so much. For Grace, and for the love I have found with Clara, I choose to forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to live free from the chains of my past. I hope you find a way to atone for your mistakes. But as for me and Clara, We are leaving this place to start a new chapter, far from the pain and shadows of the past. Ethan. Ethan placed the letter on the table, taking a deep breath before stepping out of the grand house. Clara was waiting for him outside, her hand slipping gently into his as they walked through the farm gates together. "Where do you think we should go first?" Clara asked, her voice as light as a breeze. Ethan smiled, his gaze warm and tender. "Anywhere you want. As long as we're together, anywhere can be home." They walked through the fields of sunflowers, leaving behind the old farm and its painful memories. Ahead lay a new road, where love and forgiveness opened the door to endless possibilities. Though their pasts were filled with hardship, Ethan and Clara had learned that love not only has the power to heal, but also to set them free from the darkness of hatred. As Clara and Ethan left the farm, she couldn't stop thinking about her father. Despite all the pain he had caused her, Clara couldn't deny that he was her only family left, and now he was utterly alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their temporary home in a nearby village, Clara spoke softly. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about my father. I know he's done so much wrong, but he's all I have left. If we don't go back, he'll live out his days in loneliness." Ethan looked at Clara, her eyes filled with worry and compassion. He sighed gently and smiled. "Clara, I understand. If that's what you want, we'll go back. Maybe it's time for all of us to face the past and start over." 2 days later, Clara and Ethan returned to the farm. As they walked through the gates, the familiar scenery unfolded before them, but this time, everything seemed different. The grand house stood silent, and the atmosphere felt heavy. Clara hesitated on the steps, her heart weighed with apprehension. They found Mr. Carter sitting alone in the parlor, clutching the letter Ethan had left behind. When he saw them enter, he froze. His face was gaunt, his eyes red as if he'd been crying for days. "Clara, Ethan," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "You came back!" Clara stepped forward, her gaze firm yet kind. "Father, I can't abandon you. I know you've made many mistakes, but I don't want our family to stay broken forever." Ethan stood behind her, his expression serious but no longer filled with anger. Mr. Carter's face crumpled, and he broke down completely, his tears falling freely as his shoulders shook with uncontrollable sobs. I was wrong. I've been so wrong," he choked out, his voice trembling. "Ethan, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've spent every waking moment since reading your letter realizing the weight of my actions. I failed your mother when she needed me most. I turned away from you, a helpless boy, because of my pride. And Clara," his voice broke as he turned to his daughter, "I robbed you of a loving father. I don't know how to make amends. But I need you to know I am deeply sorry." The room fell silent except for Carter's quiet weeping. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his hand hovering before it finally rested on Carter's trembling shoulder. His mind raced with memories of the past, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the endless nights of resentment. But then he glanced at Clara, her face a mixture of hope and compassion, and something shifted inside him. "We can't change the past," Ethan finally said, his voice soft but resolute. "The pain won't go away overnight, and I don't know if I'll ever forget, but I've learned that holding on to hate only prolongs the hurt. Clara and I are ready to move forward, and I think you should have that chance too." Carter looked up at Clara, his eyes filled with regret. Clara knelt beside him, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. For years, she had lived under his shadow, feeling unloved and unworthy. But as she looked into her father's tear-filled eyes, she saw something she had never seen before: vulnerability. Gently resting her hand on his, she whispered, "Father, I can't erase the pain of the past, and I won't pretend it didn't happen, but you're still my family. If you're truly willing to change, I want to help us start again." In the days that followed, the farm began to transform. Clara and Ethan helped Carter rebuild the farm, but this time with a new approach. Carter was no longer the cruel master he once was. He treated the workers with kindness and respect, often seeking advice from his daughter and Ethan. Under the warm sunlight one afternoon, Ethan and Clara stood together, watching the farm gradually return to life. "I think we made the right choice," Clara said, her hand squeezing Ethan's gently. Ethan nodded, smiling. "We did. Not just for your father, but for ourselves too." From the porch, Carter watched them with an expression of gratitude and peace. Though challenges lay ahead, with love and forgiveness, their family had found a way to rebuild everything from the ground up.